All right. So
I've been here today.
I'm going to get to our assignment in just a moment. Not everybody was here for our assignment, so. All right, so here we are in Revolutionary Kingdom Declarations again. And just to kind of trace where we've come, so far we were through the introduction of the Beatitudes and that the three triads as we divided those up. We went through the three metaphors. You are salt. You are the light. The city set on a hill cannot be hidden. And so this is where we've come to now. We are in the actual body of the sermon. And in Matthew 5th chapter and verse 20, we find our theme verse really for the entire sermon, where Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." This is getting to the root of his point. And we talked about this quote from Paul Earnhardt's book last week as a real good tone setter for us, where Jesus is depicted in Paul's way of describing this as really going after the Pharisaic distortions and blasting those away, and how that was so critical and important because, as he described these are grotesque mutilations of the very law that they proudly boasted of protecting. And so Jesus is denouncing that and describing that as completely inadequate in order for us to come to know him and to find ourselves in the kingdom of heaven. And so that is a great tone setter, and that kind of leads us into our assignment that I kind of left you with. And I didn't really give a whole lot of description about what I wanted you to do. I think some of you got a little bit excited about it, and some of you got a little bit afraid about it, and that's okay. That's all right. We're going to go ahead and muddle on through as we think about blasting away our own Pharisaic distortions in modern times. And so if anybody wants to share what you've been thinking about with regard to that assignment, I want to give you the time to do that. Over the next several weeks, actually, I want to give you the time to do that. We're in this section where Jesus is saying, you have heard that the ancients were told, and I say unto you. And so Jesus is giving some description and some flavor to some of the things that have been taught in the past that were rather revolutionary in their thinking. We keep coming back to this metaphor of the iceberg, and you can't really see it on this slide too well. But as we think about that, Jesus is diving down deep and under the surface, giving further explanation to these things. So, from the beginning of class today, is there anybody that wants to share from that assignment that I gave before I go on to give further explanation about the assignment? That may inhibit you, and I don't mean to do that. I don't mean to inhibit you. All right. Oh, okay. All right. We have one volunteer. So, like as I said, over the next several weeks, be thinking about this and come up with your own. You have heard it's been said, but I say to you. All right, Cece, go ahead, and we will.
And I don't know if I'm going to word it right, or because I forgot my paper at home. But so we've heard it say that benevolence is one of the things that the church can do with the treasury, which didn't exist in the first century, but we've got all these rules about. So I'm thinking that benevolence is a lot more than what we've decided, because once we have to decide what it's being used for, then we have to decide what falls under benevolence. And so I find a lot of benevolence being done by individuals. So we aren't able to do benevolence outside. For example, groups of whatever, I mean, and I'll use the hot button issue, orphans, which isn't really something that we would even really talk about today. That's a little bit different, but any kind of outside group that we could help, the homeless, if we could actually give money or.
Okay. All right. So let me try to summarize what you're saying. So you're saying that we have this treasury, and we have pharisaically added rules to the keeping of the treasury that you don't find in Scripture per se.
Right. I feel like we spend a lot more money on the building and the accoutrements of that, air conditioning, da 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 da.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if that's the Lord's money, how are we reaching the people? I don't think Jesus was ever attached to a place.
So this gets to be a big topic of whole mission.
Jesus was giving, he was always out in the world. I call it sitting in the dirt because in Nicaragua we would sit in the dirt. We just sit in the dirt and do whatever we were doing, whatever mission, things we were trying to accomplish. And I thought, Jesus sat in the dirt a lot. He didn't sit in comfortable places, gathering money.
All right. All right. Very, very good. That's a great example of what I'm talking about. And I'll give you an example as we're going along as well. Because is there anybody else that wants to share? Oh my, I've started something here. Gentis, would you like to?
Good.
The bar set high.
Yes.
You can correct me afterwards if I'm wrong about this. But it seems that we have never been able to accept that we just do some things out of tradition. That when we have a tradition, it has to be, we can only do things that God has approved. It's doctrine. And so in that way we've not deliberately or consciously, but things that are tradition get showed up. We have to find a way to turn it into a doctrine from God. And instead of just owning it, saying, hey, this is the way we like to do it. And that's okay to do that, in my opinion. But
It's great to have traditions and following traditions. There's nothing wrong with following traditions as long as you understand that these are traditions, not doctrines. That was a real issue with the Pharisees in Jesus' day. They had the tradition of washing, ceremonially washing before they ate. That became a law to them. We can do the same thing today when it comes to traditions that we have. Whether you're talking about facts about the assembly or things of this nature, traditions that we keep that we wonder where's the line between tradition and law. So that's a great point.
And I saw that in the stuff she was talking about. And I think we see that in other stuff.
Absolutely. That gets to the real heart of what we're talking about. Chris, you had one.
This may be more lighthearted, but actually it still points to being recognizing that there's a problem. When Malia moved here, she was all tore up that we would meet at 9 o'clock. And we would kid. She said, well, the scriptural time is 9:30. And so we go up there about every 3 months to see everybody and catch up with everything. And so I'm wandering around the house, wondering what on earth I'm going to do for this extra 30 minutes. And then they meet at 5 o'clock. Wednesdays, they've always met at 7. When we changed to 7, she was so proud. She says, I'm finally going to, a traditional conservative,
The way it should be.
scriptural church. And we'll kid about on Easter. So we got to have the obligatory scriptural sermon on the resurrection because it's Easter. And so we're lighthearted and kidding about it, but we're recognizing there is a standard that we just all expect, and it's just supposed to be that way.
Yeah. You and Gentis are partners in your discussion of that. Traditions becoming laws. All right. So let me try to give a little bit more information to you about how Jesus does this. Jesus, and now we're getting to the sermon body. And we're going to go through these case studies, this first triad of murder, adultery, divorce. Hopefully we'll get into this today. It would be great if we cover it all. Let's try. All right. Jesus takes a truth. Okay? First of all, he takes a truth. In most of these case studies, it's wrong to murder. Oh, that's true. But I say to you, is Jesus saying, this murder thing, don't worry about it? No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying there's more to this issue than you're giving thought to. If you're just congratulating yourself that you didn't murder anybody today, there's more to that commandment than that. Get under the water. See the iceberg. Don't just look at the tip of it and think that you've got that covered. So Jesus, in this pattern of teaching, what he does, he postulates a truth. Sometimes it's a prevailing opinion. It's not always a truth in these 6 case studies. We'll see that in the next triad. There is something that's not true. Love your neighbor, hate your enemy. That's not a true thing. But in most of these, he postulates a truth, and then there is this conjunction followed by, I say to you. Now, your Bible may use the conjunction but, or your Bible may use the conjunction and. And that kind of tells you where the translators are in what is happening here. Is Jesus taking the law and saying, I'm doing away with that and I'm telling you the way it really is? Or is he looking at the law and expounding upon it? And I'm going to tell you, I believe that he's expounding upon it, although my Bible says but. When Jesus says, but I say to you, he's not saying, no, it's okay to murder, it's okay to commit adultery. He's not saying that, but he's giving further explanation. He's giving greater depth of understanding. And then he gives examples, or he gives illustrations to clarify the point. So as you think about your assignment, try to begin with a truth that may not be fully understood. A truth that has nuance to it that needs to be explored and understood in a deeper way. The example that I would give, not to be controversial or anything, here's just a quick example. You have heard it said, only members of the Church of Christ will go to heaven. That's been said. And there's a nugget of truth. Jesus came to save his people who are in his church. Who are the saved people? The ones who are added to the church. Okay? So there's a nugget of truth in that, but there is nuance that we need to further explore in that statement. So you've heard it said, only members of the Church of Christ will go to heaven, but I say to you, the Lord knows who are his. And my judgments on that matter, and your judgments on that matter, are not really relevant. Leave the assigning of eternal destinies to the one who is in the position to do so perfectly. Be salt, be light. Stay in your lane, basically, is what I'm saying. There's a lot of other things we can explore about that. What do you mean, Church of Christ? Do you mean this denomination that has this church over here, as opposed to what other church? Church of God, Church of the Nazarene, what other denomination? I don't have time to go through all of that, but that's the flavor of what I want you to do with this assignment. And if you're looking for prompts, I have those for you as well that I can share with you as you think about that. This first triad of murder, adultery, and divorce, we really ought to consider these all together, because I'm going to suggest something that doesn't seem right to you, and that is Jesus is primarily making the same large point with all three of these case studies. You may not see that on the surface, but the main point is the same. And so he talks about, and the reason I put this as a triad, it seems that that's what Matthew is doing. When he says in verse 21, you have heard the ancients were told, in verse 21, and he gives one example, two examples, three examples. And then in verse 33, he says, again, you have heard that the ancients were told. He repeats that same phrase and gives his three examples. He divides it up and has that same introduction for those two different triads, just talking again about the amazing structure that Matthew builds into this study. And so, murder. And so this particular one, he establishes as the pattern setter for the rest of the conversation. He will spend more time and more words talking about this first example so that he can shorthand it, I think, in the later examples. And here's what I want you to understand about what Jesus is doing here. Remember the words that he spoke in verse 17. Do not think that I came to abolish the law, but to do what? Fulfill. But to fulfill. Now, that's just not talking about his role in regard to the Torah, the law. That's what he's doing with each of these case studies. Do you see that? He's not doing away or abolishing the command of do not commit murder. He's fulfilling it. He's giving it depth. He's giving it understanding. He is giving it the true intent that God had all along. This is one of the big 10, the 10 commandments. You're not to commit murder. And so Jesus is saying, when you hear the statement, do not commit murder, you need to look underneath the surface and see the entire iceberg. And the point that he's making here in this, all three of these, I want you to think about this, is that human beings have value inherently. Human beings have worth. Human beings should not be a subject of your contempt. Be careful about elevating yourself as being in a position to regard others in your arrogance with contempt, whether you're talking about murder, adultery, or divorce. We're going to develop that thought a little bit more. So let's think about these first verses here, beginning in verse 21. You have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, but whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever shall say to his brother, bracha, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever shall say, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. And then he follows that up with a little bit of a parable. And he talks about you're going to church, or you're going to offer worship, and remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your offering there. Go your way. First, be reconciled to your brother. Then come and present your offering. He's talking about things that are getting in the way of your relationship with God. And it's interesting how Jesus does this. First, he talks about anger, and I'm going to consider that anger a murderous rage. When he says anger here, I think he is pointing us back to Cain and Abel. Cain was angry with his brother, and he killed him. That's the kind of anger I believe that he's talking about here. So, the one who is guilty of murder, he is to stand in the court, give an account. But guess what Jesus says? The one who has just the rage, the murderous rage, but doesn't commit murder, he's guilty before that same court. He's just as liable in that same court. And then he goes on to say, the one who has this contemptuous insult, rakah, that is an Aramaic word that simply means empty. So whether you're thinking, you're saying to somebody you are empty-headed, or you're empty-hearted, or you are empty, this is a contemptuous insult. It's saying that you are pointing at somebody and saying you are a piece of, you know what, I don't want to be vulgar.
I'm worthless.
You have no worth.
Mm-hmm.
You are the worst.
No value.
That is a contemptuous insult. And what he says is, the one who is guilty of this contemptuous insult, they're not guilty before the court, they're guilty before the Supreme Court, or the Sanhedrin, the highest court of the land. They are going to stand there before the Supreme Court to give an account for that kind of contemptuous insult. And then there is this idea of a lesser insult. You fool. We would say, moron, idiot. That's not as bad as killing somebody, is it? That's not as bad as having murderous rage, is it? That's not as bad as a contemptuous insult saying you're a POS. But you're saying to somebody, idiot. And Jesus says, the consequence of that is hellfire. So notice that the intensity of the offense actually decreases, whereas the intensity of the consequence increases. It's kind of an inverse relationship as we would typically think of this. What Jesus is doing, he is intentionally scrambling our own set of approved values. He's intentionally setting your value system on its head and saying you need to think differently about how you relate to human beings. Because every human being was created by whom? And what did God place upon every human being?
His image.
His image. These are image bearers.
Do you think it's like that because he wants us to control our mind? Because it seems like a lot of the scripture is about controlling our thoughts and our mind, not just the outward, but...
That's precisely the point. Jesus is saying, God not only cares that you abstain from murdering somebody, he cares about what's in your heart. The Pharisees were all about what? The external display. Got to do better than that. It's not about the externals. It's about the inward disposition of the heart. And you may consider it a small matter to insult somebody, but God does not. That person that you've insulted is an image bearer who is worthy of dignity, who has this inherent sacred worth because God created him that way. And when you treat that person with contempt, that is the same as treating God with contempt. I hope you're just as uncomfortable as I am right now. Are you uncomfortable? Does the Sermon on the Mount make you uncomfortable? It's supposed to. Jesus is turning our world upside down and our own value system upside down. And you think about why that is. If a man murders another person, what's he saying? He's saying the life of this person has no value. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter so much that we can just erase him. That's how much it matters. We'll just erase them. And I will do the erasing. I'm going to put myself in that position as a murderer. I am in the position to evaluate the worth of this other person, and I'm going to determine it's not worth living. And so he can be eliminated. What kind of arrogance, what kind of contempt for the image of God can a person have? But all of these things are in the same family, you see. All of these are the same. All of these come from the same heart. All of these come from the same disposition of heart. And so God doesn't consider that a small thing. And so when I'm driving down the road and that person cuts me off in traffic, here's what I say. I say, that image bearer right there, he has a wanton disregard for my safety and the well-being of my family because he's driving aggressively and carelessly. Isn't that what you say?
Something like that.
The shorthand of that is idiot, right? Rather than saying that was a careless act, I'm going to define this person with this word. This image bearer. He's an idiot. That's all you can say about it. Now, he was reckless, and he did demonstrate wanton disregard, and it was not a kind act. And you're okay to acknowledge those facts, but then to attribute this definition of who he is, sum up his whole being with the word idiot, or fool, or moron, whatever it is. You're describing his identity, this image bearer of God, in a reckless way. And God does not approve.
Bruce, this may explain why Southerners have coined the phrase, bless your heart.
Maybe so.
Then that's quite pharisaical, because then Southerners say, bless your heart. And it could mean, bless your heart. And it could mean, you're an idiot. But they have covered, you see, the bases of not calling somebody an idiot. It's very pharisaical and interesting how we like to cover our bases and feel safe when we're still saying what we want to say.
But think of that disposition of heart as well. Yeah. I am in a position to evaluate another. I am of elevated status. I can make this determination. I, in my arrogance, can do this. And God doesn't suggest that is a good thing to do. You've left your lane. So it is the content of, and it is the disposition of the heart in all of these matters. It's all the same. It's not about the outward appearance. It's not about just having enough discipline to, keep the gun in your glove box. That's not enough. Can you keep a glove in your gun box? I don't even know the laws about that, but
Yes, you can, by the way.
keep it there. All right, but don't congratulate yourself. Don't congratulate yourself when you abstain from murdering somebody. There's more to it than that. What is at stake here is how you value the image bearer of God. Can you treat that image bearer with the dignity that is inherently theirs. Oh, Jesus, you ask a lot, right? But think about the spirit of arrogance that proceeds with these types of things. And so Jesus intentionally is saying, he's scrambling our way of thinking about this. It's not a small thing. It is not a small thing. Yeah, I get this.
So, talking about this arrogance, we're so quick to ascribe the worst motives to other people, but I do the same thing, and I know all my motives. I know how to give myself the benefit of the doubt and say, well, I wasn't that. I didn't really mean the worst for these other people. When I do this. You know, I'm really slack with myself while I'm anti-slack with others.
Yeah, it's easier to give yourself the benefit of the doubt. It's harder to give it to others, pride. Before we close the class today, I want us to go to this next case study just really quick because it's related. And this one has to do with adultery. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that everyone who looks on a woman to lust for her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. And if your right eye makes you stumble, tear it out and throw it from you, for it's better for you that one of the parts of your body perish than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand makes you stumble, cut it off and throw it from you, for it's better for you that one of the parts of your body perish than for your whole body to go into hell. Jesus is living in a male-centric society, and this is directed toward men. And this idea of adultery, it kind of speaks to the cultural times of his day. And again, God isn't just interested in the physical act of adultery and whether you can abstain from that, men. God cares about your relationship to this other person. And so, men, when you objectify a woman and you look upon a woman and you arrogantly say, that is the object of my pleasure, forget about her dignity. Forget about the fact that she is an image bearer of God. No, she is an object for me to satisfy my fantasies. God says, your heart is in the same place. It's not just that outward position that matters. You have failed to honor another person with dignity that is due to an image bearer of God. And the same he's going to say about divorce, and we don't have time to get into that. But before we're finished, I just want to make this concluding remark about what this is. Relationship with God is completely intertwined with relationships with people. There are no hermits in God's kingdom. The way you interact with people is the way that you interact with God.
What if it's somebody you don't know? Like,
Can we treat with contempt people that we don't know? Can we fail to recognize that they are image bearers of God?
Well, we do that when we're driving. So
Yeah,
I'd say yes.
there aren't any exceptions here.
if you don't interact with the person? All right, I'm just trying to.
You're looking for the loophole. I know. I want there to be a loophole for me to express my wrath. My arrogance is what that is.
I think it's easy to do to judge people that you don't know, speaking to Cece's point, or people you've never interacted with social media these days. you know, people post opinions or thoughts, and it's really easy when you have different opinions or different views on something to be like, oh, that person's just an idiot, you know, because they think differently than I do. And I think that's something that we need, you know, even that didn't obviously wasn't around, you know, when Jesus was talking about, but it's, you know, such an easy trap to fall into.
Name calling is the culture in which we live in. And that is the temptation for us. And it is beneath the dignity of image bearers to call other people names. It's beneath the dignity of humanity, as we are created, to do that. Don't give anybody a pass on that. But most importantly, don't give yourself a pass on that. Our time's finished. Thank you for your kind attention.